Okay, great. Thanks. I was approached by this woman named Nina about a year ago, and she had just moved to the area. She had experience in outdoor education and combining it with social emotional learning, and was coming to Fiske to kind of just wonder, to ask what sort of opportunities there were in the area to work in informal education. And so that kind of kicked things off. It got us exploring this idea of social emotional learning in a planetarium space. And just to kind of maybe fill us in a little bit about what social emotional learning is, I'm going to share my screen real quick here. So there's kind of one main authority in social emotional learning called CASEL. I forget exactly what it stands for. Oof. But they basically have come up with this kind of framework for what we often call as 21st century skills. They're sometimes considered the soft skills, and they fall under kind of these 5 main domains, right? So we've got this like self-management, that's the ability to manage one's own emotions, thoughts, behaviors. And here's some examples of that. Responsible decision-making, relationship skills, social awareness, in relation to others, and your own self-awareness. And the idea is that these 5 domains, they can appear in classrooms and in schools and in families and in communities. And when they appear in all of these places, it forms this robust kind of way for kids and just humans in general to become better humans, right? So this was really intriguing, and we applied for a small grant through the University of Colorado to get some funding to combine social emotional learning and our existing kind of virtual planetarium space. And specifically, we wanted to work with 4th through 8th grades, since those are the most common grades that visit us. And specifically, we wanted to work with Title I schools, since they tend to be under-resourced, and we wanted to bring this to them. Yeah, and so this social emotional learning framework is becoming increasingly used in schools, particularly in elementary schools. Sometimes you see it in middle, every once in a while you see it in high schools. There are a bunch of these programs that are kind of existing and brought into schools, but we actually developed 3 different programs on different topics. One of them, we thought climate change fit into this kind of SEL. I'm going to shorten social emotional learning to SEL. So climate change in particular fit into this category really nice, or like overlapped with social emotional learning really well, right? I had been kind of aware of climate change psychology that says that when kids learn about climate change, they often feel very overwhelmed by it, right? It's this huge problem that maybe adults aren't solving as much as they feel like they should, and leaves kids in a really kind of vulnerable space. So was already a little bit aware of that research, and through a coworker, met Elizabeth, and she'll tell you a little bit more about her research later. But that was just such a useful conversation to have to help guide this program that we were developing. Right, and so we wanted to, because we're kind of a planetarium, our visuals, our virtual planetarium space is kind of best at showing space, views from space. We wanted to take kind of an astronomy lens on this climate change program. So I'm going to go ahead and share the link if you want. This is to our lesson plan, and feel free to follow along. It's definitely going to go in more depth than I'm going to go in right here, but if you want it to follow along with, you can. So really we wanted to kind of make this an interactive experience, especially when it's virtual. Actually, just whether it's virtual, whether it's in person, right? Making it an interactive experience was really important to us. So there are lots of times where we have kids using their thumb scales from like, yes, I have done this before, or I have experienced this before. No, I have not, somewhere in between. We have prompts for kids to type in the chat box some of their responses. You know, how have you experienced the fires this summer, right? Right in the chat box. How has that impacted you? And we have kids replying like, oh yeah, there was ash on our car, or my brother couldn't breathe because there was so much smoke in the air. It was, we had to stay inside. Every once in a while we have them come off mute as well. And the focus of this program is really on, okay, we're faced with this large and complex problem like climate change. And whenever we're faced with a large and complex problem, we can take some important steps to solve them, right? We can first try to learn about the problem. And so the first half of this program is kind of how we learned about the problem, at least from an astronomer's point of view. And then second, we can look for creative ways to solve parts of the problem, right? Break down the problem into different small parts that we can solve. And so that was kind of our way of trying to make it more accessible to kids who are in 4th, 5th grade, right? They don't have a lot of choice in certain ways. So then we jump into our virtual planetarium. We start off at the Earth, kind of give it a little bit of context. What is climate? You guys have heard about climate change? Yeah, okay, well, what is climate change? Can you type in the chat box? And introducing kind of the ideas of carbon dioxide and the greenhouse effect. Then we travel over to Mars, right, one of our neighboring planets, and we find that Mars, like, oh, is Mars, if it's farther away from the sun than the Earth is it going to be hotter, or is it going to be colder? Oh, it's going to be colder, right? It's farther away from the sun, the heat source. And Mars used to have oceans, but it's smaller and it's farther away, and so over time it lost its atmosphere. It has a very, very, very thin sheet, compared to Earth's blanket that keeps us warm. Then we go to Venus and ask prediction questions about Venus. Venus also used to have oceans, but instead it was much closer to the sun, right? It's much hotter. So we had this runaway greenhouse effect. And it's this runaway greenhouse effect that's bad, right? Greenhouse effect, generally good. It keeps the Earth warm. It's the runaway greenhouse effect that's bad. And then we kind of return back to Earth, fly back to Earth, and kind of get very real for a second. Talking about the human role, the human impact. We've seen that carbon dioxide can lead to how thick of a blanket we have. And by adding CO2 and burning fossil fuels, humans are making our blanket even thicker, and we're becoming more and more like Venus in that way. So that ends on a pretty real and heavy note. And then kind of tried to make the transition, thanks to the astronomers and other people, right? We've learned a lot about climate change. So how can we then do something about it? And we transition into a breakout activity where we typically try to keep it to one facilitator for every 10, 15 students, so that we can actually have a smaller group discussion about how did this make you feel, right? This is really integrating in some of the social emotional learning, getting a chance to discuss and talk about how this is impacting you and how has this impacted you personally, right? Have you experienced, yes, you experienced the wildfires. Have there been other ways that you've been impacted? We've definitely found that with 4th and 5th graders, this is a still very new concept to a lot of them. And sometimes it takes a little bit of prompting, oh yeah, you did see the fires, right? How did that impact you? But they don't have a fully formed idea yet of other ways that they've been impacted. So that's been interesting. But then we did have a group of 9th graders, and they certainly were kind of spelling out a lot of ways that they maybe had been impacted, which was interesting. We found it really valuable to give kids a chance to say how this makes them feel. We've gotten wide range of responses. But a lot of kids do feel like scared, or there was one kid who even felt very guilty that they hadn't done more, right? And explicitly said that. And we also have been, have tried to, thanks to Elizabeth's suggestion, sometimes people's feelings about climate change can be complex, right? One day you might feel totally fine, and the other day you feel absolutely crushed, and then you feel inspired because you've learned something new about what people are doing to fight climate change. So that's been we've gotten some really interesting discussions out of that. And after that kind of, heavy discussion, but giving a chance to really talk about feelings, then, the focus is on, okay, well, one of the things we can do is work together. So let's do a game where we clean up some space junk. And social emotional learning often incorporates a mix of discussions and games and activities and writing prompts. And so in this game, let's see, you are an astronaut, you have to pick up space debris. And at first, this might feel very disconnected. At least for me, it did when we were like, okay, we're going to transition to this game. But it comes back around. So in this game, kids have 5 minutes to work together in their small breakout rooms. They have to find an object in their house, run around, find an object in their house that fits one of these categories, right? So, and try to minimize the amount of overlap. So hopefully 2 kids aren't grabbing soft things. So they're practicing their communication skills, they're running around, they're grabbing objects, getting their teamwork. Once they have their objects, right, they've shared out their objects, then part 2 happens where we're coming back to Earth and our space capsule, lands in the ocean as it should be, but on the way down, we lose our communications with the main base. And unfortunately, when we land in the ocean, our capsule begins to sink and we don't have any time to grab other stuff from the space capsule. All we have is our objects that we just found. Okay, there is an island nearby. How can we use all of the tools that we have right here to help save ourselves and get rescued? So then kids are having this discussion about, okay, well, maybe we can use my flip-flop as a paddle to get over to the island. And what if we use this pokey pen to spear a fish? And then we can literally have, what if we light this teddy bear stuffed animal on fire so we have fire to cook our food? Right, they're just like coming up with all these really creative solutions. And so we bring it back to climate change, right? As a 4th or 5th grader, you don't have a lot of choice in your life, potentially, but you do have these various tools that you are given. And some of the challenges figuring out how you can think creatively about the tools that you're given to solve the problems that you're faced with. So our social emotional learning specialist, Nina, really came up with that. And I really liked the wrap around back to climate change. So that brings us into kind of a big group discussion about what are some of the solutions that you've heard about climate change, type in the chat. And then I think one of my favorite parts is that all of our facilitators, we usually have 3 or 4 facilitators, take turns kind of sharing things that they are practicing, right? So what's one thing that you are practicing right now that you're pretty good at paying attention to when it comes to small climate change action? Maybe I'm really good at turning off the lights, right? Trying to save energy by turning off the lights. And then one thing that I'm trying to do better, I'm excited about trying to eat less meat because meat takes a lot of energy to make meat. And so they're even like, there's a cool place outside of Denver that farms bugs and you can eat bugs or, whatever. So then each of our facilitators kind of runs through a personal example to kind of help connect that. And really we end on a note of, right, like thinking creatively. No one solution will solve the problem. It really takes working together and taking all these small steps, and just continuing to talk about it with people that you know. So they get these suggested take-home discussions, and one of them is, interview a family member or a friend. What have you seen change in your lifetime? Think about a complex problem you've faced in your life. What are some steps that you can take to break this down into smaller pieces and solve creatively? Yeah, so that's been a really promising program. We've gotten a lot of really positive feedback from it, and teachers who are saying that they've felt like it's good a balance of social emotional learning and content, and that students were kind of more engaged than they usually are. And for a few teachers, it even helped them feel more comfortable discussing climate change than they had been before. So I felt like that was really positive. And we plan on continuing this and kind of refining it as we go. 60 minutes to do this program is actually a very short time frame, and there's so much more detail you could get into, but it's been definitely a really valuable, it's felt like a really meaningful program, and been really fun to run. So yeah, I'm happy to kind of take any questions on this program in particular. Bugs are not allowed for Meatless Monday.
So I'll pipe in because Briana was generous enough to let me tag along with a class that they presented to. Right after we found out about it, I pinged her and she got permission from the teacher. I thought it was a really great program, and I felt your pain with some of the pulling teeth with trying to get students to chime in. Now, I think these were the ninth graders. That's a tougher audience to have them participate, especially through Zoom. I did not get to, I don't think you did the game.
Correct. We didn't do it for the older students. We spent more time kind of talking about in the smaller group discussions. Yeah.
I think the game is awesome. That really is inspiring, and I think it could be used in all sorts of applications. And just the notion of getting the kids to run around their house or to coordinate with their teammates first and figure out what they're going to get. And I think that's actually just a really fantastic way to bring it all back. I think that's the real glue to the whole program. So well done.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I think definitely finding ways to get kids up and moving, especially during a virtual presentation, has been much needed. Yeah. Yeah, so I think there's there are these bigger kind of moments where we insert social emotional learning, and then smaller ways that we do this as well. There's we've been in communication with each of the classrooms ahead of time about, hey, what are your core values or classroom mantra. And so something like, we follow the 4 C's, right? Communication, compassion, composure, and collaboration. And so then we'll find ways to kind of integrate those throughout as well to reinforce whatever social emotional learning they're kind of already doing in their classrooms. That's been good. I see Rebecca's question about what are some of the climate change tools you give the students? Yeah, and I think, so here, I'll just share real quick. Here's one slide that we end up sharing with them about, as kids, here's some 10 things that you can do to take part. And they're simple things like turning off lights or recycling or, picking up trash and sharing with friends and family, things like that. But definitely get the input from kids as they're typing in their answers and sharing our own. As part of this, I kind of got on a side launch of like, okay, well, what are, because at first we wanted to share like all these, from the small things that you can do in your everyday life to like, what are the kind of big global things that other organizations are doing, you know, some of the, like the geoengineering things or other maybe ideas that you wouldn't think of that are contributing towards climate change solutions, but it turns out in 60 minutes it's just hard to get there. So we send a few of those along sometimes, depending on the group. Do we have a planetarium visualization of space junk? We do, and actually we haven't been using that. That's a great idea. We should use that for that portion. And then, yeah, we did, you know, find that some of the groups that we were working with did have some second, or let's see, like some English language learners. And so we actually then distilled our presentation into like just a few kind of just bullet points that were written out in English and Spanish that were very like easy entry for reading level that we could share alongside. So if they were, for those English language learners, they could hopefully kind of follow along even still.
How are you making connections with the schools that are doing this? Are there groups that connect with you or choose to come to you, or are you out doing some sort of outreach?
Yeah, we initially, you know, when we were kind of starting to explore this combination of social emotional learning and astronomy, we did a search and found some districts that already kind of integrate social emotional learning. So then we reached out to those schools that had a sort of a social emotional learning specialist in their district, and kind of worked with that group of professionals for a while, and then had those connections when we ended up applying for this grant. Yeah, and then they kind of helped us make connections with the teachers.
Just
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Just a thought, Brianna, about I really like your concept of telling the stories of Venus and Mars, because especially young children learn by hearing stories. I mean, we all love to hear stories, but I think the narrative is a good form to tell stories of, you know, different situations and different outcomes. And it would be wonderful if we could tell a story about a faraway planet that was faced with runaway greenhouse gas potential, and they solved it by doing X, Y, and Z, and now the people are more cooperative, or, you know, but anytime there's a story, I think it sparks our imagination. So I think it's great that you're using the storytelling.
Yeah, and thanks for that feedback. And I think there are ways that we could probably even make that storyline stronger, right, and make that story component more robust.
Brianna, my question is similar to one that was just popped in the chat box as well. Is are you doing anything as far as before or after activities to extend student learning? And then the question I have, because I get this from all of our teachers, is are we doing anything? Are you doing anything to prepare teachers to talk about or introduce controversial topics to their students? Because when I ask what the major barrier is with our classrooms, a good number of the teachers just don't feel comfortable introducing this topic, and it's amazing that they still don't feel comfortable. Now our district happens to be bifurcated between Boulder County and Weld County, which is like the oil and gas capital of Colorado. So it's kind of interesting there, because when I get a question from a teacher, I can tell you before looking at the school what county they're in and what student population they're dealing with. But I was kind of curious if you had any of those things that you do with teachers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we do send out for this program. We only have kind of follow-up. We send them a post-lesson suggested post-lesson materials. So this includes some discussion questions, some activities, and some resources. And I think we can definitely strengthen these a lot more. And I think having both kind of a before and an after is the model that we want to move towards, so that you are really extending it.
I think the front loading piece would help with what Noah mentioned earlier about getting students to collaborate a little more.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Speak.
Yeah, that's a great point.
They had something that sort of prompted them prior to the activity.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. Yeah, and I think so. Some of these discussions that we send, right, involve, say, like as I mentioned, kind of interview a family member or a friend, somebody you feel like you can talk to about this. Come up with 2 ways that your household could combat climate change, or things like that. Some references that we give to teachers include some links to how to talk to kids about climate change, or how to teach about climate change in your classrooms and things like that. Family guides for how to have those conversations. But I think that those could really be expanded on, and kind of some of that given up front, so that teachers feel like they can start to have those discussions with their students before.
And one thing to think about is don't limit yourself to classrooms. It seems like almost all of our work now being done around something like this, like an energy audit type thing, or those type of concepts, are almost all after school groups now. With our Resource Wise program, with EcoCycle and those type of groups. But they surprisingly have 50 to 100 members in almost every school. And they meet pretty regularly after school. And this might be just a terrific opportunity for them to be able to touch. And I think you get a wider audience too. Almost every district has an energy and sustainability coordinator now. And they're pretty tied into those clubs and after school groups.
Sorry, what was the name of that kind of role? Energy
and sustainability. So both Boulder Valley and St. Vrain have large programs there, and there's quite a few around the state. And what we're seeing is more after school clubs, and they're the ones that do the recycling in all the classrooms. They're the ones that fight for, less, styrofoam trays in lunchrooms, and those type of things. And so those
awesome.
groups are terrific.
I would also second what you're saying, Michael. My name's Alicia. I work with Beck and Anna at Ceres. I used to work at Denver Zoo, though, and we actually started doing a whole bunch of social emotional learning after school programming. And we found that the after school programs were really looking for content that addressed social emotional learning skills. And it was really high demand, and there wasn't a ton out there from external providers to come in and do it with their students. I would look to the Denver After School Alliance, because they're a huge network of after school providers. They just include Denver, but they're very well organized and do a lot of professional development and stuff. So there's always, potentially opportunities to even come in and do like some professional development for the community providers that provide the after school programming.
Awesome.
The second thing I wanted to ask too is kind of along these same lines, because my experience with the social emotional learning has been pretty much all in after school. And I'm curious, maybe a question for both Michael and Briana. Do you think that, if when trying to partner with teachers to implement this type of curriculum in their classroom, is it helpful? Are they looking for, kind of that tag of social emotional learning? Like if you can kind of market it, to teachers by saying this is really, it incorporates a lot of social emotional learning skills, is that of high interest to teachers?
From the teachers that kind of filled out their initial interest in working with us, a lot of them were on board because it included the social emotional learning piece. They were really excited about that.
Yeah, that
was
what I was curious about.
Biased sample, perhaps. So I don't know if Michael, you have anything to add to that?
It's definitely a topic that is being talked about more and more. Almost every after school group, regardless of the theme, whether it's the VEX robotics team or whatever it is, they always include that in as well. It sort of goes hand in hand, even though it's not the same, but the idea of the design thinking model, starting off with empathy is a huge piece of that model, and sort of teachers sort of combine that with the social emotional piece usually with a lot of their design concepts and ideas.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good tie-in.
Nice.
Okay.
Well, thanks.
I've given a couple of links to Boulder Valley and St. Vrain sites with the energy and sustainability, so you can see a little bit about what they do.
Awesome.
And both of them, they sort of wrap that around the idea of we are stewards of our environment.
Very cool.
And that messaging sort of holds true with all of those after-school groups.
That's awesome. Thanks. And thanks for all your feedback. I do want to shift and give Elizabeth the time. So Elizabeth is a psychologist and psychoanalyst practicing in New York still, is that correct? And teaching faculty at Folk Institute and at Adelphi's University postgraduate programs. So her focus in the last decade or so has been on the relationship between mental health and the non-human environment. And as I mentioned, we were connected through a coworker, and her feedback to help build the program that you just saw was really invaluable. So Elizabeth, really appreciate it. And I'm glad you could be here to tell us a little bit more about your research.
Thank you. It's nice to get to know what's happening there in Denver. And I'm not too frequent anymore, but used to frequently visit there. And I think it's great that you're doing so much work, especially in the planetarium, about climate change. I think that kids are ready to think about it and talk about it. And I would say I've been a clinical psychologist for 30 years, and it's just been in the last 10 years that I've tried to hold on to what's happening in the climate when I'm sitting with my clients, so that I don't miss things that they might say that might be related to the climate emergency, like, boy, this is really weird weather we're having, does one let that comment go, or does one sort of say, well, what do you think of that? What do you think does that mean anything to you? So my whole focus has been to help people understand we're all existing in a larger world than just our interpersonal world, and that it's okay to talk about that, rather than thinking that it's sort of an avoidance of interpersonal problems or issues. It could be just as important as interpersonal issues. So in Briana's method of telling about her workshop and the story she tells about Venus and Mars, I thought it might be useful if I started by telling you all a story about an adolescent who came into my office, who'd been seeing me for a number of months about other reasons why she was anxious. And then she brought up an instance of something that happened in her science class that week, which was really troubling to her, something she'd heard about climate change. So I thought I would just read a few paragraphs of how that exchange went. I got her permission to share without identifying her, and I got her parents' permission to share. And this is part of a paper I gave at a conference last December on climate change and psychoanalysis. So I'll just start in here. Jennifer, I'll call her, sat down for her therapy session, and she looked quite shaken up. And she said, I'm feeling really scared. My science teacher told us on Friday that if things don't change, in 20 years, this climate change will be irreversible and that we'll all be doomed. Kids asked him if people were doing enough to try to stop it, and he said, no. So, all my other problems seem like little problems, and that's good, but this bigger problem is terrible. I can't stop thinking about it. You can imagine I felt all kinds of feelings when I heard this story. Like, why didn't the teacher ask the kids how they felt about all this? Or why didn't he offer that there were actually solutions for this? Or, did he ask them what their concerns were? But of course, I didn't have time to process all that because Jennifer continued on in her chair across from me. This is when we were all in chairs across from each other instead of on Zoom. So she said, someone else asked the teacher if he had solar panels on his roof, and he said he thought they were ugly. Well, duh, So us kids are supposed to solve this problem. I'm really, really scared. So then it comes to, how do I help someone process all this fear, who's just being quite spontaneous and who doesn't have any place else to talk about this. She told me that she had tried to talk to her parents about it, and they said, well, the problem will get worse as you get older, and then you guys will figure out how to solve it. And to me, that was sort of a, a backing out way of answering this adolescent's problems. And after she told me about that, she said, are my parents sane? They don't seem to be worried about this. They just said that my generation will fix it when we get older. So the story is kind of getting worse as it goes on. First you start with an adolescent who's heard this terrible news, and then it's like, there's no way to fix it and that adults aren't fixing it. And then it's like, are my parents really sane? So I'm sitting here with all of this, and fortunately, I've thought about this issue for a long time. I don't know what I would have said if I had never given this serious thought. But so I was sitting with this a while, and I asked her, what are you most afraid of? And she said, well, it would be bad enough if me and my family were going to die, but I don't want everybody to die. And then she looked directly at me and she said, do you think we're doomed? So, as a therapist, we have to walk a line. How much truth do we give people, especially kids? And I'm sure you walk that same line, in your story, like Briana, of the runaway greenhouse gas on effect on Venus. Like, do we draw the comparison? Do we extrapolate? Do we? But with clients who come in who might already have a problem with anxiety, it becomes more complicated. You don't want to set them into kind of apocalyptic anxiety, but clearly this girl was already having sort of apocalyptic anxiety. So, and she was asking me, do I think that we're all doomed? So I believe we should always be honest with clients who come in and ask us honest questions. But I honestly believe that it's uncertain whether we're doomed or not. And that's basically what I told her was, it's unclear how bad things need to get before enough action is taken. And it's unclear whether enough action will be taken in time. And I think what I found is kids are more relieved to hear that honest answer than to hear dishonest answers like, well, we've solved big problems before, we're going to solve this. That may be true. I'm not sure it's true. But we can give people hope that there is the ability to solve the problem. And even if the science teacher is not doing his part with his solar panels, that there are ways to solve the problem. And she can think of, what are her big concerns and how this is going to play out in other ways in her life now, not even, 40 or 50 years from now, whether she's thinking about, human extinction. So as I asked her more about this, it became clear to her and to me that she was worried that she wouldn't be able to have children because the environment wouldn't be, safe enough. And this is not an uncommon concern. You may have heard it yourselves. I read that like half of kids between like 12 and 25 are saying they're not sure whether they want to have kids because of climate change. That was a research study. So we have to treat these things seriously. And Jennifer asked me repeatedly, do I think that the world is going to be safe enough for her to have a child? So I again have to answer these questions with uncertainty, and I'm not sure, but what do you think can be done? And she really hadn't heard of any solutions. So I did what we call psychoeducation, which was I told her about Paul Hawken's book. Do you know of that book? The Drawdown book. Oh, it's a great book. I have it here in case you hadn't seen it. It's called Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming. And it's got great pictures of all kinds of solutions. It's got like 100 chapters on solutions to all the major ways that this problem is getting worse. And it's just a great comprehensive book on, family planning issues, meat consumption. And she took that book home to her parents and they read it together. And she started feeling like, well, there actually is a solution. And then she started feeling sort of angry that the solutions weren't being implemented. And that's kind of a natural progression when people are waking up to this problem. Looks like someone's showing, 100 solutions. I can't read that. Maybe somebody else can. A drawdown conference. Yes. Yeah. I hear people get very inspired by these conferences. By the way, if you raise your hand and just unmute yourself or something, chime in.
Oh, I have a poster with 100 little pictures of it outside my door. So they're drawdown. So students like that.
It's great. Sometimes when I'm feeling pessimistic, I look at that book. So why am I telling you this story? I'm telling you this story so that you understand that I myself and other clinicians are starting to think about how we're going to respond as more and more people bring in what's called eco-anxiety, eco-distress. One clinician named it pre-traumatic stress syndrome, where it's not post-traumatic, it's anticipation of these huge problematic events occurring, which you all know about, whether it's social conflict over resource scarcity or multiple extreme weather events, or, social disorder as governments struggle with having enough resources to address multiple tipping points that are going on at the same time. That clinicians really want to know how to help people, and now school personnel want to know. An organization of school guidance counselors contacted me and asked me if I would do some workshops on this issue that the kids are starting to talk about. I really think we need to be training the school guidance counselors. And when I think of your social emotional learning program, Briana, I think, well, maybe the school psychologists can help you out there too, or the school guidance counselors. And the only difficulty is they tend to be so overworked because they're not, at least here, on the East Coast, there are not too many of them for like 400 students. You'll have maybe 2 school psychologists. So, but there's the potential to do group work with these issues. And there's something called climate cafes that are starting to be used to address this in groups of people. In the UK, they're starting to train people to do this, and I'll segue into sort of an organization that I helped to start here called the Climate Psychology Alliance, North America. We're here to train clinicians in how to help, clients, patients, students with the climate emergency. So we do workshops in climate psychology, talking about both the pre-traumatic stress and dealing with emotions that occur after extreme weather events and displacements and transitions with moving. But one really key idea we have in here is that every person comes to this in their own time frame. And we now think of it as an epiphany. Like, you have an epiphany about this issue when you realize it's really seriously happening to yourself, maybe your family. And that's a moment when you're waking up to the climate crisis. And do people have a sense of that? Like, can you relate to that idea of epiphany? And when you sort of realized how bad the situation is, do any of you sort of remember when that happened to you, or how it happened, or what brought it on? I'm just a little curious.
think for me, it's happened in a couple of different stages, right? So there's like kind of one tier of epiphany and then like the next, right? Like as you learn the depth of this problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what we know from psychology is that if you don't have somebody to listen to you and really help you think and process the feelings you're having about a potentially traumatic event, that you push them away and you put up your defenses. And unless something is seriously putting it in your face again, you avoid it. And so what I was working with Briana and her program was to sort of open up a little more spaces to think and process this. But the problem is, as one of you said, the teachers are sometimes uncomfortable in the school bringing this up. And we can guess why. They're probably uncomfortable thinking about it themselves. And maybe they're feeling guilty about a carbon footprint. Maybe they're, climate change scientists too are feeling some of these feelings I see in the chat there, that I'm sure it's why they're having trouble being forthcoming. But so psychology has this idea of containment and providing a listening space to just follow where these thoughts and feelings take you. And unfortunately, the average classroom, or if you have like Briana, only has 60 minutes to cover the whole topic. It doesn't really allow this in-depth kind of soul searching that even a 16-year-old or 17, like this Jennifer, really needed to do some soul searching about. Was she gonna, give up this dream of having a child that she's had? So we want to help clinicians know how to lead people into these conversations with themselves. And we want to help school personnel, and maybe schools need like a support group for the teachers to help them think about it together and to just discuss what their big fears are. Maybe their fears are for their children. But we want to get the word out that it's not a disorder to have distress about this. And it's normal. I would say it's a sign of mental health to be distressed, even to have some insomnia when you're really learning about this. And it takes knowing how to set it aside so that you're not ramping up your anxiety so high. Like at nighttime, we call it doom scrolling, when you're looking at all these bad news, climate news, and confirming everything you've feared. And we really need to know how to sort of live our lives in the context of this, but with the horizon being as clear a vision as we can have, even though it's uncertain, that there is going to be a huge change facing us all. And if we can find someone to talk to about it. I have a colleague that every Tuesdays at 2:30, we meet and we talk about this. She and I teach eco-psychology together. And there's so much bad news that we needed time to think about. Oh, did you hear about this? Now there's a little good news. So we say, oh, thank God, the XL pipeline, isn't this great? We can be happy today about this stuff. But, we are being impacted by climate news a lot these days. And being able to think about it and know it enables me to help my clients and teachers and guidance counselors think about it themselves. And if the guidance counselors can think about it, yes, Deanna.
There. Thank you. So what you just said a few minutes ago about there's now and then there's the final disaster scenario in people's minds. But I sometimes talk to kids in the upper elementary, middle school level about, okay, so Colorado's in a 20-year drought. Forest fires are in a change as okay, there's now and then there's 50 years from now or 20 years from now or whatever. What happens now that we can participate in and not replant our forests with the trees that aren't going to survive in the current drought situations, change our gardening habits to manage the food productions, knowing that water is a limited supply. So think about the problems and the solutions in a very shorter term view instead of the long-term view. I'd like what you would have to say about that.
I think that's great. I think that's really a useful way to approach this, especially with younger kids whose ability to imagine is sort of limited in terms of, 80 years out or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's good to encourage kids to think about what they can do. And I think that really is a feeling of empowerment. And anything that can help kids feel like they're able to impact their own futures is gonna positively impact their mental health. I think it's when you get into the high school years, when kids are thinking about planning their career future, that they might think about what specific kinds of problems, big picture problems, they might want to focus on developing an in-depth understanding of in their sort of college years, so they can have a bigger impact in those really long ahead years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. So where do we go from here?
For those of us who are bringing these sort of climate change ideas into classrooms or through our outreach or providing resources for teachers, what's your recommendation for us?
I would recommend that you have some kind of a way of making a support group for the individuals who are teaching. Because I think the more, as I say, the more people can think about this together and process their own feelings about it together, the less they're going to back away from the material. And the more they're going to be willing to hear difficult things if they've had their own moment of thinking through the difficult things. So if you have a support network of people who can regularly help each other out, and even come back to this group and say, oh, I had a kid in my class today who said that they didn't think there was any point in going, because we're all doomed. And, it made me feel so sad. Those are sad feelings to hear kids talk about that kind of stuff. And if you can't, get help with that or get some kind of support with that, then you're going to want to shut down those conversations that might lead to those moments. Does that make sense? Okay.
Very much. And I think it's super helpful for us as we think about sort of programming we offer, that this is something that maybe needs to be part of our equation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just think, we can't help people with what we can't think about. And I did read a good article, which I can get to you all about environmental science education, and that the teachers who were trusted most by the students were the teachers who could hold the uncertainty of it in their mind. Whereas if there were teachers who said, oh, well, we're going to be doomed and, not much to do about it. Oh, well, yeah, we're going to fix this problem. We've always fixed problems before. They weren't as trusted by the students, and the students didn't develop a sense of curiosity as much as when they had a teacher who would say, well, this is a really big problem and it's going to need a really complicated solution with many different areas of society cooperating with this. And we're going to have to figure out, things that we've never had to figure out before. And this is going to take a new way of thinking even. Those kind of teachers really stimulated more discussion and more, complex questions and curiosity, because it's the truth.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I think you kind of talked about this a little bit, is there is hope, and just kind of bring up the good news. And there's a lot of good news, although, but I think also, you know, kind of see that, I mean, this is a species-wide problem that we're all going to have to contribute to, and just kind of show all the examples. You know, the Drawdown book is an example, but there are a lot of solutions. There's a lot of good news that's happening. Unfortunately, it's too slow. But, you know, kind of see there is hope, but you know, so I think, you know, one of my questions I put in there is like, well, is there a danger in saying, you know, well, we don't know if we're doomed. You know, there's some uncertainty. Don't worry about it. Well, you know, I think kind of keeping that line between the urgency of having to do something and the distress, and say, you know, say, well, maybe it won't happen. So I think that's an important thing to also to kind of bring in the idea of this collaborative global work that's happening, and kind of looking at all of these things, and, you know, at the same time, things that we're working on in terms of climate change are also looking at social justice issues. And so I think, you know, there's a lot that can be done, but you're solving more than just climate change. There are all kinds of other things to make a better life. So it is possible. It's just going to take a lot of work.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And it reminded me of another thing that I always talk about when I do talk about uncertainty, and that's the concept of tipping points, social tipping points. You know, climate-wise, people are used to thinking about the other tipping points, but I think about social tipping points and Greta Thunberg. And no one could have predicted that a high school girl in Sweden could have had this huge impact that she has had from really studying the issue and realizing nothing was getting done to address it quickly enough. And so she kind of took matters into her own hands. And not everyone needs to do that, but people will do that. And that's because societies often change through tipping points when there's a crisis. You know, like Pearl Harbor was a tipping point, and it threw us into a huge mobilization. And we don't know what could be a tipping point, but I think kids especially are encouraged by this concept of tipping points. And you know, like how quickly the Berlin Wall came down when nobody thought it was going to come down. You know, 2 months before it came down, people said it would never come down. And these are stories that we can tell children about how change happens, and it's not all on their shoulders. And, you know, I do believe that there has been a leadership vacuum that has turned us in a different direction now. And so much depends on leadership, as we know. So I do actually have more hope than when I had this case sessions with Jennifer. And I would be speaking a little differently now if I'd had these same sessions with her then. But you know, there's so many factors that influence how this plays out, is what you're saying. Yeah. Any other thoughts, questions? Yeah.
So I guess less so with schools and teachers, just because public schools, but do you have anything to say regarding do you have any clients that have, whether it's their faith or lack of faith, do you have anything to say about how religion is tied into any of your work? I know Catherine Hayhoe, for instance, and some of her work, but I don't know if there's just anything that you want to say about that side of this topic.
Well, it might be things that you already know, which is that, you know, socio-political identities have a great impact on what kinds of information we take in. And those of you who are deeper into science know about the confirmation bias. You know, we have these blinders on and we seek out information that confirms what we already believe. So it's important to try to put oneself, like Catherine Hayhoe says, put oneself in the shoes of the people you're talking with. I have clients who are climate deniers, and I just try to understand, where they're coming from, why they're having that point of view, what has scared them most of the time into having that point of view. And I never try to convince people to change a point of view, because it's like asking them to change their sense of self. And social identities are very hard to change because you're afraid of another social factor, which is the social stigma bias, which is you don't want to stand out as different from your social world. So we have to be respectful and to try to meet people where they are. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, questions? Personal experiences with this issue? I'll just add that if any of you want to learn more about what the Climate Psychology Alliance is or does, we have a website, and we have a climate aware therapist list. If people are looking for a therapist, they can find a therapist who's not going to say, well, this is all about your father, which, therapists have said in the past. And you can just learn about what we're doing and the kinds of things we're teaching about. It's www.climatepsychology.us. So just a thought if you want to learn more about that. So I think I've used up my time, right?
Thank you for sharing. I think this is so important for us all. I mean, I see it in my 7-year-old, this incredible existential threat, because obviously we've talked about climate science in our house forever. And how do you move past it being a threat to being something that's challenging and exciting and a place where you can make a difference?
Mm-hmm.
Really appreciate your insight. That's been super helpful.
Oh, glad to help. I'm glad Briana asked me here. Okay.
Yeah, I guess I'm now feeling kind of inspired to try to look around at what sort of resources exist already and making helping to create sort of that guideline for teachers or other kind of leaders, educators, in how to kind of talk about these things and tips. And so if anybody else is interested in joining me on that, awesome, or happy to kind of like share that around at some point.
Yeah, I'll put this link in the chat in a second, but I work with the Clean. Are you guys familiar with Clean? Yeah, some heads nodding, the Climate Literacy and Energy Awareness Network. And we recently, this past year, published some pages, mostly focused for elementary teachers, because we find elementary teachers really struggle with this, but of how to bring climate change into the classroom appropriately so that it doesn't overwhelm young learners. It's based on, a variety of different research that's out there. Sorry, my 2-year-old's in the background. And we also have a page on there too that kind of talks about the controversy of climate, or the controversy of climate change, and how to address that. So I'll also put that in the chat as well.
That's the page that I share with all of our teachers, the page that was just mentioned about how to address climate and deal with climate pieces. I think it would be tremendously helpful if anybody has the opportunity to do this, a little 2 or 3 minute video of a teacher saying, this is what I do, this is how I address this in a fair and balanced way. These are some of the issues that have come up and this is how we've dealt with it. And that would be so much more powerful than sending out some things, to hear from one of their colleagues, one of their peers, that, hey, we've had success doing this and it's not as hard as you think. So if anybody gets a chance to put together a little 2 or 3 minute video, that seems to be the way that teachers are going now. When they see a 2 or 3 minute video clip, especially made by teachers for teachers. It's pretty impactful.
That's a great idea. We do webinars with Clean, so I wonder if we could actually explore that idea and have some short clips of teachers talking about how they dealt with it and put it on our website with our other webinar resources.
And I was blown away. This just happened in the last year, just with the pandemic, but it was so challenging to get teachers to understand a new resource or material that we had. And then we had 2 different resources come out, and they did this, having teacher videos, a little 2-minute videos, 3-minute videos. And I sent those out to our teachers, and I haven't had a single problem. And all the other ones that we're still trying to do it the old fashioned way of trying to get people on the same webinar or something like that. This seems to really resonate that hey, this teacher's doing it and they're having no problems with it. So it's
So Mike, it makes me wonder, with the incredible studio we saw at the Innovation Center and kids that could capture those videos, if you don't have a tool at hand to make videos using the Innovation Center students.
Yeah, it's one thing that definitely need to think about doing. All that's been on hold because it can't even go in the building.
Right. Yeah, I know, how sad.
You know, I think just a video with the reputation of you know, Series or UCAR or whoever it would be is a pretty powerful thing too.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, I guess I want to thank Elizabeth again, and I wasn't sure if there was any internal stuff we had to do, but
Thank you, Elizabeth.
thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, and good luck in your work. And
Thank you. And thanks for sharing and making a difference for all of our young people, especially, who are going to change the world, we hope.
yes,
Has anybody put Elizabeth's website up in the chat?
I have not, but
I put it in the notes document, Mike, that I shared in the chat. This is a running notes document. It has some notes and chats from the last meeting we had too. So I put that in the link to the notes document in the chat. I can reshare it though.
I just get that out to all of our, every month when I take notes from this, I send it out to the appropriate teachers. So
great. I'd be happy to help people. So nice to meet you. And again, good luck with all your work. Take care. Bye-bye.
That was awesome, Briana. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I really love this idea of having some of our meetings be these learning opportunities too. This is like, I really appreciated learning both from you and from Elizabeth about the work that you've been doing. Thanks, Briana. I think it's a great plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. I'm gonna get that drawdown book and poster. That poster looks cool.
Yeah.
And I'll also say this is my first time actually hearing that acronym of emotional learning, and it's eye-opening, and so thanks for sharing all this stuff.
I wanted to ask Briana if those slides you showed up would be in somehow in the captured today.
Oh, you mean with like the activity that we?
Well, the ones that yeah, the activity ones, but also the one that you showed at first with the concentric circles and this.
Right, I'll put it here in the chat. That's where I grabbed it from.
Thank you. Yeah, that one.
This is different, like the social emotional learning, you hear it if you've got kids in elementary school, they're definitely bringing it into a lot of activities. So I think it's really great that we're aware of that movement and teaching as we're sort of targeting some of this stuff.
Yeah, and so far it's like, as far as our research has gone, there's just not a lot of integration with sort of STEM fields yet. So there's a lot of opportunity there, I think.
Very true. I think that is very true, that social emotional learning, at least stuff that I saw that would occur in after school settings, in Denver and the Denver area, although also really nationwide. I mean, I was somewhat plugged into the nationwide after school network too. And there was a lot of curriculum around social emotional learning, but it didn't tie to any sort of specific field or content. And a lot of times, at least the feedback that I would hear from various different after school providers was that, well, the kids find it kind of boring, and the curriculum isn't super engaging or fun. And I think the STEM fields have an opportunity to make more engaging and make that type of learning more fun, more hands-on.
And as far as I understand it, right, that's where a lot of the kind of like middle school and high school teachers, especially that teach STEM fields, they don't see SEL as like a relevant thing for them necessarily. And so I think finding ways to provide examples for that is hopefully helpful.
I think you're I think definitely. I think I've been super interested in this topic for quite a while, of how to connect STEM and social emotional learning together. And because one of the big pieces of social emotional learning is that empathy piece, and that's so huge in climate too, in terms of being able to understand different perspectives and even just to empathize with non-humans, to empathize with our environment is super important. I think there's some really interesting bridges that could be made between that and the need for students to learn more empathy skills in school.
We can tie it to the workforce development sort of piece, that more and more we are interdisciplinary, and to solve complex problems like climate change, we need to be thinking about social justice and equity, and we need to be thinking about impacts and mitigation. And so the social emotional part becomes so much more important for all of our scientists to have at least some grounding in it, to be able to do the sort of interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary work that we need to solve these complex problems.
Oh, I was going to say it's been more than 30 years, I think, since I was actually a K-12 teacher. But I remember really thinking about these things. We had a different name for it. We call it the affective domain, but, in lesson plans, making sure we also, looked at the affective domain. So it's exciting that I'm sure just the paradigm or how we think about that has evolved. And so I'd be, I'm interested to go back in and look at how that's evolved a little bit in that intervening decades.
I just posted 2 links, one for STEM education and the case for SEL integration, and the same with science. I haven't seen these 2 articles before, so I'm looking forward to diving in.
Well, thank you again, Briana. Building on what Beck said, I agree, Beck, that having these learning sessions and during this time of pandemic and the inability to meet together, this is a nice venue to hear and learn and process together as a group. So, anyone can propose a topic, and maybe even some of these ideas, Mike, that you're posting here, some of these readings, it can be a speaker, but it could be we read and then come and discuss as a group might be helpful also. So anyway, Deanna, do you have any thoughts about kind of what's next? I know we have Noah's talk on Friday that some of the folks in this room have already signed up for, but I think most people in here know about CocoRa's, but Noah is going to be sharing a presentation with our national collaborative group on Friday on CocoRa's. Or Noah, if you want to say a few words about that, a preview.
Not necessarily, but yeah, I guess it's more geared towards facilitators who might want to implement it, whether in their school or at their workplace. But I'll also touch a little bit on just the broad view of citizen science and how Kokoraz has been successful in the field as well.
I liked the book club format idea too, John. There was some big concept ideas that got put on the table today that I think could be discussion type items with background. The one that Elizabeth mentioned that kind of struck personal with me was the private universe idea. The idea that preconceptions in science are huge, but she touched on them in terms of the social emotional learning aspect, which is something I hadn't thought about before. And, you know, today might be particularly relevant in our current world, the idea that we have these ideas about the way things are, and we'll change anything before we'll change ourselves. So, so that there might be more to read about how climate change fits into that world too, that could help teachers and students be more receptive or more willing to look at the idea through different lenses. So yeah, I like the book club idea, John. I think we ought to try to gather a list of resources and ideas, including people, institutions, and resources that we might be able to put up for some what appeals idea. So yeah, I'll start that. And if you have people or books or ideas, let me know. I'll put them on the list. It doesn't have to be a commitment to do something, just a topic or a thought that might be something we could pursue. I think it's a huge aspect of what the ESS collaborative could provide, could help with. Mike has tremendous resources. Noah has huge expertise. Classroom teachers, people that are out with the teaching community, have a lot to say about what's happening and what's going on. So,
yeah, and I liked Mike's idea about a little video clip or a series of video clips of kind of effective practice, and from a teacher perspective or an after school perspective, or everyone has a way that they've handled things and they've learned over time. And I think people like to hear, oh, there's a nugget in with what she said that I could really use in my practice, kind of thing. And Mike, that's brilliant. I think that maybe assembling some of those, or maybe even having a teacher join us sometime, and having us hear from them about ways that maybe, Mike, if you know of some that would be willing to come and share, and we can kind of talk and process from a practitioner's perspective, would be helpful too.
The big one that really we've had success with is we use discovery education in our middle school sciences and in some of our high schools. And they have a whole series called Spotlight on Strategies. And it's like 300 different videos on anything and everything you could possibly imagine on how teachers put this digital material to practice. And it's a little 3-minute segment each time. And all the teachers we talked to, they said that's the beautiful part, because they realize that we're not only changing the way students are learning, we're changing the way teachers are teaching in today's world. And so I would love to see a spotlight on strategies for climate education. And so it would take the very best of what Series and the Clean Network have put out and published about teaching about controversial topics, to really sort of guide teachers and hold their hand through that lens, maybe an elementary version, a middle school version, a high school version, that they could see that, oh, these teachers have had success and here's how they did it. So I could follow that, because the number one barrier, and we did this years ago when Noah and I were, working with Globe, 10 or 12 years ago, I guess, the polls that we sent out, the number one barrier was teachers just didn't feel confident enough to do it on their own. And they were sort of afraid to take that step because of the potential political fallout from within their own building or parents at home. And so if we could sort of...
You said is that searchable on the web? spotlight on strategies. You said discovery.
It's behind what I could do is create a dummy account and let everybody see it, because it's really cool how they do it. And it's just all of them are real teachers, and they come up and they say, I'm citing evidence today, and here's how I'm citing evidence using this thing. And so a little 2-minute video, and the teacher will be like, this is what I did. But you know what? It didn't work all the way, because we had students in our class that had this issue, and here's how I dealt with it. So oftentimes it's a really kind of a neat introduction, but then the practical piece of this, the wheels fell off here, but here's how I made it work. And I think teachers really value that and appreciate that. But again, it's coming from a teacher. It's not coming from, the professional or that sort of thing. And I think, Rebecca put a link in there, and I don't know. Are these
Okay, well, I'll definitely do some searching through here and take a look. And it's a really interesting idea for clean.
Was that the right link, Michael?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious if you could view it, the video piece. Curious if you could view it with without being logged in. And what I could do is maybe next time we meet is just show you 1 or 2 of them, just to give you an idea, and I'll try to create that link to allow you access in there. That's one
That'd
thing.
be cool.
All of the big publishers, Pearson, McGraw-Hill, HMH, all of them, they're struggling to keep up with this new change in technology in our classrooms. And there's a couple platforms, Discovery's not the only ones by any means, but there's a couple that realize that, hey, we need to help teachers unlike we ever have before. And they are head and shoulders above everybody else. These 2 or 3 in that charge. The other guys, here's a teacher's manual, good luck. And that's it. And I think teachers are really starting to rely on these digital platforms for help. So if we could take that and make the climate piece, make that smooth transition, it might work.
Yeah. That's a
And
really cool
we don't
idea.
have any idea what all these changes from this year what that will mean down the road. I mean, I think there's going to be some permanent changes besides just COVID changes as a consequence.
Well, we met as a department the other day, curriculum department last week, and said that our PD, we're going to have to reevaluate what all of our PD looks like in the future, because think of how much money you save on gas. I mean, we have 411 square miles. We have teachers all over the place. Some of them have to travel 45 minutes from their school to get to a central location, that we may never or very, very rarely have in-person PDs in the future, which I love. I personally love the in-person PDs, because I just think it's more connections there and that sort of thing. But with these breakout rooms and all these opportunities of time you save and gas money you save and everything like that, it's going to look different.
We had much bigger uptake from rural teachers for our PD stuff this year with them being online than we've ever had before.
So it's the other thing that would be cool too. Briana mentioned these really cool activities with these students. If there's any way to capture any of that and show student work and show how that teacher addresses that in the classroom, that'd be kind of interesting as well.
I've got to get going, everyone, but thank you guys so much. This was really awesome. Thank you, Briana, and everyone. John, Deanna.
See you Friday, Noah.
Okay, have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye. Thanks for letting me crash.
Thank you for joining us, Alicia. You're always
Yeah, thank you.
welcome. Always welcome.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, I'm excited to explore more of this, Michael. So
Yeah, it should be good.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, thanks.
Thank you
everyone.
again, Briana. Thanks so
Mm.
much for hosting this.
Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, you're
Bye.
welcome. I felt like there was a lot of good discussion. So
Yeah.
thanks. Bye.
Yep. Thank you. Bye-bye.